Welcome back to another episode of Minecraft Mods Unlocked. In this episode, I will be continuing my Mechanism tutorial series by explaining everything you need to know about fission reactors, nuclear waste, turbines, the induction matrix, and so much more. And in my next episode, I will go over the fusion reactors, antimatter, supercritical phase shifter, and much more. So be sure to stick around for that video too. Remember to like the video if you found it helpful, and subscribe if you're interested in more Minecraft mod tutorials in the future. Alright, I'm Avo, and let's jump in. Alright, so let's start out with making lithium, lithium gas, and lithium dust. And to do this, all you need to do is set up 2 thermal evaporation plants, one creating brine, which is then exported into the second, which is creating liquid lithium. And if you need a quick refresher on how to do this, then just set up your thermal evaporation plants, set up 2 ports right here, one for the heat, which I'm using a resistive heater and a creative energy cube. This is just for my convenience. The second is going to be for a sink with some water. Have that exported out. Make sure you have the face on the front, and then it's going to be exactly the same on this one, as you can see back here, minus the water. The brine comes in here. It's turned from brine into liquid lithium, and then the liquid lithium is then pumped out using a mechanical pipe into a rotary condensator. This is then being powered by another creative energy cube, and then what this rotary condensator does is we have it on decondensating, which means the arrow is basically pointing to the left and not the right, and then it turns liquid lithium into lithium, which is actually the gas form of lithium. And then using the auto eject, we're going to output to the right, which is the chemical crystallizer, which is then taking the gaseous lithium and it's turning it into lithium dust. And that's going to be used in later recipes when we start talking about other things over here. And speaking of other things, let's talk about nuclear reactors, specifically fission reactors. This is the maximum size. It's 18 by 18 by 18. This is the minimum size. It's 3 by 4 by 3. For the thermal evaporation plants, the minimum is obviously 4 by 3 by 4, or I guess it would be 4 by 4 by 3 because it's 3 blocks tall. And then the maximum size is 4 by 4 by 18. So it's the same width and length as this one, but the height is obviously 18 blocks tall. Now, for most other multi-blocks, like the Induction Matrix, which we'll talk about later, and also like the Industrial Turbine, everything can be resized. So real quick, let's look at the Industrial Turbine, and as you can see, the max size is 17 by 17 by 18 because it needs a center, whereas the nuclear reactor is 18 by 18 by 18. All right, so first off, I'm going to take you through making your uranium oxide. Then we're going to go through making hydrofluoric acid, and finally we're going to make uranium hexafluoride. So let's start off with the uranium oxide because it's the simplest. And basically all this does is it is a bunch of uranium, which I have in here. You can mine it using the digital miner, and then you can have it exported through a logistical transporter into the back of an enrichment chamber, making sure the enrichment chamber is powered, as you can see down there. Then have that make yellow cake uranium, have it export to the left into a chemical oxidizer, which is making uranium oxide from the yellow cake uranium. Then from the chemical oxidizer, have that exported using the pressurized tube into another chemical infuser, and make sure that chemical infuser is powered. Now to make hydrofluoric acid, it's a little bit more involved, but it's super simple still. We are making brine here. The brine is being exported from the back, imported into an electrolytic separator, and that is separating it into sodium and chlorine. To the right of that is a chemical infuser, which is accepting the chlorine, and then it's also accepting hydrogen from another electrolytic separator on the back. So it goes sink, electrolytic separator, which then brings hydrogen in the back, and then brine, electrolytic separator, which then brings chlorine from the side. Now, chlorine plus hydrogen creates hydrogen chloride, which is then exported to a chemical injection chamber, which is then combined with gunpowder in the back. And I recommend just creating a mob farm or maybe a specific creeper farm to get the gunpowder. It seems to be the easiest way. I think you can also crush flint using the crusher, and that can get you gunpowder as well. So maybe take a look at that way as well. And then combining the hydrogen chloride in this little section right here with gunpowder, it then makes sulfur. Next up, using a chemical oxidizer, have it accept the sulfur, which will then, once it's powered, create sulfur dioxide. Have another electrolytic separator accepting water from the back, and then have it export oxygen to the back of the chemical infuser. And as you can see, I have oxygen here, I have sulfur dioxide here now, and I have sulfur trioxide in the middle, which is then being exported into another chemical infuser. And as you can see, I have water vapor here and sulfur trioxide here. And how I'm getting the water vapor is I have a sink connected to a rotary condensator. I have the arrow pointing this way, which means it's turning the water into water vapor. And then I have that exporting from the front and importing from the back. So that will import the water vapor, which makes sulfuric acid. Then you export the sulfuric acid from the chemical infuser over to the chemical dissolution chamber, have some fluorite or fluorite blocks in a chest, have it importing to the back of the chemical dissolution chamber. And as you can see, I have the sulfuric acid here and the fluorite block here, and that creates hydrofluoric acid. Just export the hydrofluoric acid using a pressurized tube into that same chemical infuser that we also imported the uranium oxide into, and that will actually create uranium hexafluoride, which is then exported out of the bottom, or out of the front here in this case, and imported over into a isotopic centrifuge right down here. So if I were to power this, and then I were to just place that down there, as you can see, it's now doing stuff. And it is actually creating fissile fuel. This fissile fuel is then being exported into the back of the fission reactor port, and that port is actually green, so it's actually accepting fissile fuel. Now, before I get too ahead of myself, let's actually talk about how to make a fission reactor here. All right, and to make the fission reactor, we're going to need just 5 types of blocks, and the minimum, as I said earlier, the minimum is a 3x4, or a 3x3x4, I should say. So you can make it that small if you want, but this one is slightly larger, and I'll go ahead and show you how to make a 5x5 now. So start with your fission reactor casings, and this needs to be the outside casing of the fission reactor. So we're going to make this a 5x5, so that's 5, 2, 3, 4, 5, 2, 3, 4, 5, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then we're going to bring it up 5, so 2, 3, 4, 5. And then go ahead and just fill the top in, and I'll show you the end result. All right, so this is what it should look like when it's done. It's just an empty cube on the inside. And let's go ahead and fill the floor up with some reactor casings as well. And from there, we can actually start adding some reactor glass if you want, or you can start adding your ports if you know where they want to go. But I like to start with the fuel assembly and the control rod assembly. So starting with the fuel assembly, you can add as many as you want pretty much. I'm going to add I think 4 towers here, just like this. And at the top of each fuel assembly, before it touches the roof, you're going to need to add a fuel rod assembly. So this is the fission fuel assembly, and this is the control rod assembly. So add that at the top, otherwise it will not be a very good time for you. And then go ahead and just start adding your reactor glass all around the rest of the faces, or you can make it the reactor casings if you don't want to see any of the inside of the reactor. All right, now that we have all of the facings except one block covered in glass, and we have all of the insides correct, once you place this last block down, it should have red particles just like that. So again, I'll show you just from all angles what it looks like, just in case you were wondering. Now, let's go ahead and add our reactor ports. And for this build, I'm going to add 2 on this side. So we're going to actually add 1 right there and 1 right there. And then I'm going to add 2 on this side, 1 right there and 1 right there. Next, with a configurator, come up and shift right click on some of your reactor ports, whichever ones you want it to be. This one I'm going to make waste output, and this one I'm going to make coolant output, and these 2 will actually be input. All right, so I ran the uranium hexafluoride from the machine over there, and I just ran it underneath and into the back of a isotopic centrifuge. On the bottom here, as you can see, I have some power going in, so it is powering this up, and it is then creating fissile fuel. Now, using a pressurized tube, go ahead and just confirm that it's going to output the fissile fuel here. And to do that, you can go to the front and have it output and then auto eject on. And as you can see now on my pipe, there's going to be fissile fuel. Bring that up to one of the import ports right here. We can just click anywhere on the reactor, and you can see that it's filling up with fissile fuel. Now, before we actually start the reactor by pressing this button here, we're going to make sure it has coolant in it. And that's where our sink comes in. So let's just go ahead and grab a sink, and let's grab a mechanical pipe and just place that right there. Mechanical pipe right on top. And each sink will produce 32,000 millibuckets of water per sink. And as you can see right inside there, it's now filling up. And this is why I like the glass, to make sure that on the inside there is coolant. So you can see that there is coolant going inside there, and you can add more sinks if you want it to basically fill up quicker, or if you have a bigger reactor like that one over there. And as you can see, it just filled up the rest of the way pretty quick. Just to make sure that your reactor is running correctly, you can place a fluid trash can down here if you have the mod trash cans installed, and then you can just use a pressurized tube to actually export all of the used up water. It would be steam, and it would just go straight into here, so that way it doesn't fill up with steam. And then on this side, you can use a radioactive waste barrel and the same pressurized tube. Once you start creating radioactive waste, it will then go into this barrel, and it will start to decay really slow. So I think it's like 1 or 2 millibuckets per tick or something, it'll decay. So if you have something really small, this will probably decay faster than what you're producing. If you have something larger or even like that, then you're going to need either a lot of these or a different way to use the radioactive material, which I'll show you later. All right, so now that we have our trash can and our waste barrel, make sure both of these are on full just for safety, because if this does end up overheating with too much waste inside of there, then it will actually explode and kill everything and everybody, including you, for like a massive radius around your area. And if you have cheats enabled, you can type /mech, then you can go down to radiation, and then you can press remove all. And if you're in creative, or if you're just testing it out, then that'll remove all radiation sources in case you accidentally broke something that is radioactive. Now, another thing before we start it up is, once you break this barrel, after it has radioactive material in it, it will create radioactivity around the area. But once we start it up, we could break anything on this reactor, and it would actually still keep the area clean around it. So you can break the reactor, just not the barrel or anything else like this right here. So coming up to the reactor, select activate, and then as you can see, the temperature will go up. And if you want to change the temperature, just left click on this icon right here, and the temperature is still going up, but it doesn't look like our coolant is going down. And as you can see, this and this are both empty. So if I were actually to remove this right here, you could see that it would start to fill up with steam quite a bit very quickly. So let's make sure that's emptying into there. And if I were to remove this one right here, then as you can see, it will start filling up with nuclear waste. And I removed that pipe, and as you can see, there was nothing, there's no radioactivity going on. But if I were to let some nuclear waste go inside here and then remove that, as you can see, the entire area becomes radioactive. So let's go ahead and place that back down, and then run that command I told you guys about earlier, and now the area is safe. Another thing is, if I were to break this, the area does not become radioactive, and once you place this block back, it fills up exactly to where it was, so you don't lose any resources. The only time you would lose resources is if you broke the blocks in the interior right there. Either that one or those in there. So what's happening now is the uranium hexafluoride is actually creating fissile fuel. The fissile fuel is then being exported into the fission reactor, and the fission reactor is burning the fuel, creating steam. Now, this doesn't create power necessarily on its own. You actually have to use the steam with a turbine to actually create power, and I'll go ahead and show you how to do that now. All right, so to make a turbine, you're actually gonna need a good amount more blocks than the fission reactor. It's actually quite a bit more complicated, but I'm going to break it down here so that way you don't feel overwhelmed. So let's go over the blocks that we're going to need first. And I think I'm gonna build it right here just to keep it kind of in line. So you're gonna need turbine casings, turbine valves, turbine vents, saturating condenser, pressure disperser, rotational complex, electromagnetic coil, turbine blades, and turbine rotors. And then you can also use structural glass, which is what I'm using there and there, so that you can see inside of the turbine. And by the way, a 5x5 is actually the smallest turbine that you can make. I'll go ahead and make a little bit of a larger one here. So let's start out just like the reactor here. And let's make a 7x7. So as you can see here, a 7x7 has a center, which is what we want. And now we can just make it how tall we want it. All right, so it's now 7x7x7. And this is what it should look like once you're done filling in the outsides. Now let's go ahead and come over to our turbine rotors. And let's place that directly in the middle. So let's bring it up 3 times. Let's place our blades on there. And then right on top of the turbine rotor, let's place our rotational complex. So right on top of there. And then we're going to place our pressure dispersers all around the rotational complex. Okay, now our pressure dispersers are filling out the entire area around the rotational complex, which is right there. So now right on top of the rotational complex, let's actually add a electromagnetic coil, and all around that, let's add some saturating condensers as well. And I'm actually gonna make this 1 block taller just so that I can place some glass in the top so that we can see it. So what saturating condensers do is when combined with turbine vents, which I'll install in a second, it turns steam that is not being used to generate power back into water, which if you don't have a infinite water source like this, you can actually bring back over into your reactor and have your reactor burn it again, which then would allow you to power this, and this would create even more power. So it's kind of like a renewable energy source. All right, so now that I made this 1 block taller, I'm just gonna go ahead and destroy these blocks, and this is where our vents are going to go. So your vents cannot go below your pressure dispersers, so they have to be at the same level or above. So I'm just going to place these vents here. Now, as you can see, all the way around the outside, I have 2 layers of vents, 1 at the pressure disperser and 1 at the saturating condenser. At the top, I have the electromagnetic coil, and underneath that, there's the rotational complex. Then there's the saturating condensers. Now let's go ahead and grab some structural glass and just start filling in our gaps here. So for the turbine, you're really only gonna need 2 turbine ports. So let's go ahead and put 1 there. And then maybe I will put 1 right here as well. And now we can place the structural glass all around, and make sure it's structural glass and not reactor glass. Reactor glass will not work. Okay, I have the structural glass placed all around except this block right here. So if you follow this tutorial exactly, then once you place this block, as you can see, it shows the red particles, and now we can access the menu, which we can see the max flow. And we can also take a look at what is limiting for the power output, or I guess the power production. So basically what we do is we'll actually connect the steam that we've been making over here. Let's connect it up here. And now as you can see, it is starting to make power by rotating. So there's not a whole lot of steam being made because there's not a whole lot of reactor here. It's not very good. So let's go ahead and increase our burn rate in the reactor. And basically what this does is it creates more power by using, or creates more steam, sorry, by using more fissile fuel. So come up to this area right here, and it says my max burn rate is 8. So let's do 6 and go ahead and press that button. And as you can see now, my burn rate is 6. And let's see, the fissile fuel is actually going down. Okay, so I've added a few more isotopic centrifuges here. So we have 5 in total. And as you can see, the fissile fuel is actually going up now instead of down, which means that it's going to continue to create power forever now. And the nuclear waste is going inside of this bucket, and the steam is going through this pipe and into the turbine. As you can see right here, we've made 44 million FE. So this is actually what produces power. So if we were to take some of our universal cables here and place it onto this one, as you can see, it charges the universal cable. All right, so what this multi-block is called here is the Induction Matrix, and basically it's a multi-block energy cube. So instead of one of these, where it's an energy inside of a small cube, which is obviously 1 meter by 1 meter, also known as a block, it's as big as you want it to be up until 18 by 18 by 18. So again, this is the max size, and this is the minimum size that I could get to work, which is 3 by 3 by 4. All right, so everything that you're gonna need to create the induction matrix is as follows. You're gonna need the induction casing, some basic induction cells or any of the other induction cells, some basic induction providers, or again, any of the other induction providers here. So if we type in induction, we can see that there's even, that goes from basic all the way up to ultimate, and that's the same thing with the providers, all the way up to ultimate. And then you're going to need some structural glass, again, not reactor glass, and then you're going to need some induction ports. So to keep it symmetrical, I'm going to make the induction matrix a 7x7x7 as well. So I'm just going to do it a few blocks apart here, and it basically is just like every other multi-block that we've started so far, so I'm just going to go ahead and skip to the part where we are adding new stuff. Okay, I have structural glass set up all the way around the outside, and then I have the casings set up on the outside as well. So each face has the structural glass, and each like edge, I guess you would call it, has the casing. So from here, let's go ahead and start adding at least one basic induction provider, and then at least one basic induction cell. But because this looks so cool, I'm actually going to make a little design here. All right, and then I'll place my induction provider right in the center, and then I will fill in the glass which I use to enter and exit. And then on one side I'll use an induction port, and on the other side I'll use an induction port. And as you can see, it sparkles. And then we can bring our power, which we are creating inside of the turbine here, over to our induction port. And as soon as I place this in here, notice at the top it says 0, 0, and then I'll shift right click, and then it goes up. As you can see, it is filling up right now. Super quick, actually. Now, if you have anything to charge, like armor or anything like that, you can also place it inside the induction matrix, and it'll charge it up for you. Now, this will store your power, but what if we want to use our power? Well, then go ahead and take your configurator, shift right click, and it says the induction port transfer mode is set to output. So red is output, green is input, and in this order, this is how you create power, this is how you use the power, and this is how you store the power. All right, so next up, let's talk about plutonium and polonium ingots here, or actually they're called pellets, and how to make those. So using this as an example, this is my bigger reactor, and it's set up just the same way that one is set up, but it's just larger. And coming from our waste port here, as you can see, it's yellow, just as that one is over there, and that one is exporting into the waste barrel. But instead of just throwing our waste away, what we can actually do is turn it into useful pellets, which are also pretty radioactive. Like the plutonium is pretty radioactive. As you can see, the radioactivity is 20, whatever that is there. Anyways, to do this, all you need to do is output your nuclear waste into a isotopic centrifuge. Make sure that's powered, which it is, obviously. Then that is going to turn your nuclear waste into plutonium, and then you can place a pressurized reaction chamber directly to the right of the isotopic centrifuge and have that import the plutonium into there. Then add water, as you can see, water is coming from the back, and add fluorite dust, which is coming from the top, and the fluorite goes there, the water goes there, and that'll actually create plutonium pellets once the plutonium has reached 1,000. So once this reaches 1,000, it'll start producing. As you can see, it's past 1,000 and it's producing, and there's the pellet, and then as you can see, the plutonium went back down. Now, every time this makes a plutonium pellet, it actually fills up with spent nuclear waste right here, and you should output that into a radioactive waste barrel, which it will eventually decay, but it decays, I think, much slower than that one over there. Now, to make polonium pellets, it is quite similar. You just need a solar neutron activator. You pump in your nuclear waste to the solar neutron activator. That then causes the nuclear waste to turn into polonium, which you then put inside of a pressurized reaction chamber, again with water and again with fluorite dust. And then, as you can see, it creates polonium pellets. Now, as you can see here, this is actually full because I forgot to put a barrel in front of it. So what I'll do here is just place a barrel and then place a pressurized tube, and then make sure that the front is set to output, and make sure it's on the right tab. It was the chemicals. So now the front is set to output, and as you can see inside of there is spent nuclear waste, and this is then creating polonium nuggets again. All right, so a couple more things before I go, just to end off here, is you should always have your hazmat suit on when you're playing with the reactors and stuff. You should always have your reactors a very far distance away, and just have that chunk loaded using like journey map or something. And then another thing is a failsafe here. And now I'm using a reinforced observer from SecurityCraft, because the regular observer in ATM 10 looks like this for some reason. As we can see, I have the top reactor logic port here. I'm going to show you here. I have the top one set to activation, and then I have the bottom one here set to damage critical. So once I place this observer back, we can see that it is observing this side here. I'll place this back right here, and now the reactor is, as you can see, on, because scram is selectable here. So now it's off, status disabled, and now it's on, status active. Now, if we were to power this piston here, it would then make that observer observe it, and it would then disable the fission reactor. And because this is set to damage critical, so if the fission reactor ever receives a ton of damage, as you can see right now, it has no damage, but say it fills up with nuclear waste on accident, which would then increase the temperature, which would then start to damage the reactor before it explodes. Theoretically, it would shut off because the observer tells it to. All right, guys, thank you for watching. Make sure to like, subscribe, and everything else that all the other YouTubers beg you to do. My name is Avo, and peace.